Hi guys, thanks for tuning into another episode of Nuggets News. Today I've got a special guest. We're going to be diving into all things trauma-related, psychedelics. They've really taken off in popularity, so we're going to be talking about microdosing and everything else that comes with this kind of great awakening that we seem to be going through at the moment. So we've got Giada Vittoria from Immaculata Healing. Welcome to the show.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
And you're coming to us from Ubud in Bali, which seems to become a bit of a spiritual center, and plenty of Aussies are venturing there as well. But what was your background? How did you get on this spiritual path towards healing others and psychedelics and everything?
It was somewhat of a necessity for me because, I was born spiritually awakened, and it wasn't until I was around 8 or 9, I realized everybody wasn't communicating with plants and spirits and things like I was. And so, as often will happen to people like that, that was really shut down in me when I realized, like, oh, this isn't okay. You're not allowed to be like this. And so, throughout then my adolescence and teen years and into my early 20s, I suffered a lot from like a tremendous amount of depression, anxiety, and it kept escalating for me. And because I didn't know how else to handle it, I was, guided into like psychiatry, and they just kept throwing medication at me and throwing diagnosis at me and telling me I was, I had like so many things, and I just wasn't getting better. I was only getting worse. And so finally I had to have like kind of a wake up call and decide to take matters into my own hands, because it was very clear that none of the professionals I was working with had any idea what was going on with me or had any desire to actually help me beyond just throwing drugs at me, which actually have no evidence of even working. And so I decided to take matters into my own hands, and I started doing extensive research. That's when I found out, oh, there's actually no evidence, even by studies that were paid for by the pharmaceutical companies, that chemical balance actually exists. And I had this very rude awakening and just diving into so much research about this, and understood that, oh, psychiatry was invented by the pharmaceutical companies, and just, so many things. And it was really, really intense for me. Kind of, this was before 2020. A lot of people went through similar types of experiences at that time, but for me, it all happened before. And I kept just going down different avenues until I was determined to heal. And I was like, I reject all these diagnoses. I reject the fact that it's impossible for me to ever get better, which is what they all told me. And I was like, no, I'm alive. I'm going to get better. I'm not going to stop until I do. And so on that journey, I had series of spiritual awakenings as I went down different avenues to see what actually worked and what didn't. And got, insane amount of certifications. I was just very, very fastidious with my studying and what works. And along that path, I found that I was actually quite good at supporting other people's healing. And so I've done that ever since then. So I've been a professional healer since 2018, and been in continuous study for many, many decades, and just like, what is working, what is not, okay, let's continue to move forward. And I don't believe in any possibilities, any limitations. So that's also a reason I refuse to niche. So people come to me with all sorts of things, physical, spiritual, emotional, whatever, and I'm like, let's see what we can do. The work I do is beyond modality, so I'm not just using like, oh, this one thing that's going to fix everybody. Like, that's just not how it works. We're all so different, and it's very nuanced if someone comes to me with an issue. So we're going directly into that issue and seeing what it is. And along that road, I started, like I said, when I was younger, I would be communicating with plants and stuff. Like, my favorite thing was to like hang out with the trees and like chat with them and receive their wisdom and their medicine. And so once I started having spiritual awakenings again in like the 20 teens, this communication really started opening again, and my psychic awareness started opening a lot more with cultivation as well. I also had a lot of teachers that weren't great, and learned a lot of things the hard way, like how important it is to be grounded and stable and not just like float out into the universe and let yourself be like subjected to anything. So through all of that, it's all a part of the way that I teach, which is very based in groundedness, safety, making sure that you're rooted and stable. And then on that journey of working with herbs and plants and things, I started to explore different plant medicines, and very much so, mostly almost exclusively from like just working with their frequency and working with them as an entity, and not so much like just, you know, taking ayahuasca and things like this. Because for me, because I had so much trauma, I knew that that probably wasn't the best thing for me to do, to just, you know, go to the jungle and drink ayahuasca. No offense to ayahuasca at all. Beautiful medicine, but I think it's important to work responsibly. And so I started working with the frequency of mushrooms and psilocybin around that time as well. And then in 2020, I started working with it more personally. And in 2021, the mycelium told me, like, you need to help bring this medicine to people who need it for healing. And so that's, since then, I've been supporting people as appropriate in that way.
It's
And it's
fun.
been quite beautiful.
It's funny you say that. I got a similar message on one of my journeys, and talking about, you know, my past, you know, work in pharmacy, and it's important to get people back in touch with nature and these plants that can heal. And that was definitely a similar message I received on one trip, which is why we're doing these style of interviews more and more. So,
Beautiful.
before we get into what was working, what wasn't working for you, and how to heal, you mentioned that, you know, the big pharma stuff and nothing worked. How would you say, you know, in the pre-interview you mentioned it harmed you, but how would you sort of describe that for people? And a lot of people, I've helped some people get off antidepressants, and they describe it as like coming out of a brain fog, or it just kind of numbs them rather than helping. But how would you describe all that experience for you on the different types of drugs?
Oh man, for me it was actually a living hell coming off the medication. Being on the medication, I probably took like 15 different medications throughout my time on medication. I think that one of the things that is the most harmful is, and there's a lot of work being done by people who've been medication harmed to fight against this, which God, I hope works. But you know, they've got all the money. But to have informed consent, so have people know. For example, the medications that I was given, a lot of them have a very, very high risk of increasing suicidality, a very high risk of different sexual dysfunctions. Luckily, I didn't, you know, obviously experience either of those. But the last medication that I was on, which almost killed me coming off of it, is considered more difficult in the community, in the medical community, to get off than heroin. And I was never told that. When I was just told, take this, take more of this, take more of this. I was never warned. I was never told anything that, like, most, I mean, this was before social media was really huge when I was getting off of it. And so there was only really like Reddit communities. There wasn't any education at all. And I joined these forums for specifically this medication, and no one could get off of it. People were like, my husband's going to divorce me if I try to get off of it again. I just have to resign that I'm going to be on this brain altering medication for the rest of my life. And like, that's hard drugs. Those are hard drugs. And I was a young girl when I was prescribed these. So, not to mention that getting off of it was severely traumatizing, way worse than any of the symptoms that I ever had for the reasons that I went on it. I mean, I had brain zaps, I had seizures, I had peripheral neuropathy. Like, it was heinous. They recommend you go into a facility for a year if you want to get off this medication.
Yeah, yeah.
And none of that stuff was ever told to me before taking it. So I'm very serious about informed consent. Like, I don't even think these drugs should be legal, and let alone they're giving them to pregnant women who are being born with dependencies. It's insane to me. This drug that I'm speaking of specifically is often prescribed to pregnant women who are experiencing depression. So these types of things are just absolutely not okay to me. And then, what was the original question? That had
Yeah,
a
just the different effects you kind of experienced when you were on them and then getting off them and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think getting off of it was hell. I mean, it's one of the worst things I ever went through, and like I would never have been able to imagine that being in that much torture.
Yeah.
And it took me many years to come out of that, and I don't know if I would have been able to had I not had been so diligent with finding the right tools that would help. And I'll tell you, most things didn't, like I definitely tried a lot of things, but I understand why a lot of people just are like, I have to be on this for the rest of, like, I can't do
Yeah.
this, but I think that that's really, really, really dangerous and obviously harmful.
Yeah, and just for people at home, if you are on those, as we've kind of touched on then, it's important to chat to your doctor if you want to get off them and don't go cold turkey, because some of them can be dangerous, as you say. But there are ways which we're going to maybe get into more now. So, what worked for you getting off them, and was microdosing one of those, which a lot of people seem to be in favor of?
Yeah, so I'll just first echo what you said, which is that if you are on any pharmaceutical medications, do not under any circumstances stop them cold turkey. That it could kill you. I mean, don't do that. It's very, 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 very dangerous and harmful to your brain and your nervous system. So don't do that. But yeah, there are ways that you could get off in a healthy way. And so for me, unfortunately, like I didn't know of any of those ways. And so I actually I had moved states from one state to another state, and because of the insurance complications with that, I wasn't able to get my medication. And this particular medication was one that is extended release, and you can't stop taking for more than 24 hours without like extreme consequences. And for me, this because my psychiatrist was negligent, I wasn't able to get a hold of them. I wasn't able to get my prescription for like 3 weeks. So I had to go through very intense, heavy withdrawal, which I told you some of those symptoms that I went through. And at that point, once I finally got a hold of this woman, she was like, well, just start taking it again. And I was like, are you insane? Now that I know all of this, there's no way. So what I first did was I went to see psychiatrist after psychiatrist. I went to like the best psychiatrists in the country, supposedly. They all said I was like, what's happening? Can you explain to me what's happening? Like I'm very interested in what's happening in my brain and my body, like, and they all just said, I don't know, take the medicine again. And I was like, how is that helpful? Like, I'm telling you these experiences, I'm having seizures, all the things I've never experienced before. They didn't care. And so I was driven farther and farther away. And so I just started with like, acupuncture and Reiki and different things like this. I started meditating a lot. And I just started learning. I was a voracious reader. I wanted to learn everything I could. There came to be a point where is the rain okay?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. Where I was doing so much, reading all these studies and papers. And finally I was like, you know what? I'm never going to find anything that's going to make me feel better about this. So I'm just going to be done with this. I know everything I need to know. And now I'm going to focus on how I get better, because it was just making me more angry, wasn't supporting me. So I just started reading about like, well, how does the brain actually work? Because my brain did not feel okay, and none of these medications made it worse. So I was like, how do I, maybe if I can understand how it works? And that's when I started learning about neural networks and neurolinguistics and all these different types of schools of thought and research and evidence about how the brain worked. And I started reading books about that, and that led me to learning about quantum physics as well. And that really blew my mind and really kind of gave me hope for the first time. I was like, wait a minute, there's a chance that I can get better. If all these things are true and they feel true to me, a lot of the stuff I was like, okay, but this really felt true to me. And I always say, like, you need to find the path that resonates with you, that feels right for you. We all have different frequency attunements. And so this was a way that I could really wrap my brain around it. because I could see the science. And so this is sort of was my entry point. I meditated for hours a day, and I was just very, very, very determined to find a way to rewire my brain and heal it. And I was like, the brain is made of plastic. There's no way that I'm just going to be like this forever and I can't repair it. And when I understood that what had happened to me was like brain damage, that was a dark day. I was like, oh my God, can I cuss on here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, these motherfuckers damaged my fucking brain. And there were so many people. I had to end up leaving the forums because everybody was like, I'm going to be, like this forever. And it was so much. And I was like, I don't believe that. I can't live with believing that. So I just understood that my brain could heal because of what I was learning. And so, okay, now how? Like began to really understand intellectually how these mechanisms worked. And then I was like, now how do I actually do it? Because learning about it gave me hope, but you can only hold on to hope for so long. You need the change, right?
Yeah.
So that's when I started doing like more intensive energy healing modalities. And then all the while I was meditating hours a day, every day. And then finally, with energy healing, I was seeing a lot of improvements on people I was working with. So I had started at this point to work with others, and I was seeing like insane miracles, so beautiful. And I was like, well, this is cool, but it wasn't working for me. And I was like, all right, well, there's got to be something, like, what's next? So every time I learned something, didn't so much work for me. If it worked for other people, I kept it in my tool belt. But I kept going, like, what's next? Like, who's your teacher? Who is this teacher? And I kept kind of going until I found spiritual healing, which is the highest level of healing that exists. And that's when I was like, okay, this is all. I only need to look here. And now I kind of made it, is how I felt. Like, this is where things are going to move for me. And underneath spiritual healing is where this is how I work now as a spiritual healer. And this is where things started actually moving for me. In that container, I also started to learn about the role of the ancestors in our healing. And like, I was like, oh, well, this makes a lot of sense why I could do all this stuff, but nothing was moving, because we think we're just this person having this experience all on our own, but that's actually not the case at all. And so there's so many factors influencing us. And learning about learning in this new way really helped me to finally have movement with myself in my own healing, finally get some relief. It definitely wasn't an overnight thing for me. I don't think that's, unless you have an acute thing, usually it's not an overnight thing. Although I don't want to put limitations on the work, because I've had many, many people come to me for one session and that's all they needed. But it depends on the situation. It's very nuanced. The healing is extremely nuanced.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. I had a similar one after I broke my back, and then painkillers and similar thing, and it's hard to get off. And the pharmacy world wants to put you on certain things to block it but not heal, and all that type of thing. And then you end up going down these other paths until you find kind of that natural healing path and the spiritual path, and those things to actually heal you. So it's fascinating to hear. More and more people are coming to these same conclusions as they can't get answers from Western medicine, whereas in the East, I feel like a lot of this stuff is, it's been there all along, which more and more people are turning to.
It's more of like a first line of, which, I mean, it doesn't really help me, but I sometimes think, like, if only I would have grown up, somewhere else or in a different circumstance. First of all, I never would have been put on medication in the first place, because in many indigenous cultures, when you start having symptoms of what we in the West would call mental illness, they're like, oh, you're ready for your training. And then you begin whatever lineage that is, you begin your training, and they begin to develop you as a healer. And so I can't imagine what my life would be like if that had been my journey versus like, just take more drugs.
Yeah. You touched on multi-generational trauma. Let's dive into that a little bit more. I had another guest on, and they were talking about even the Western science experiments with mice and these things where they can do these multi-generational patterns of behavior. We've had guests on who have been in the MK Ultra program. We talk about these elite families and these royal bloodlines where they seem to have this multi-generational abuse and trauma. So more and more people are realizing this is all very real, and does it actually alter our DNA and epigenetics of how things are expressed? Is there a spiritual component to it too? But what are your thoughts on all of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the things that myself being a very like practical type of person, the first time I met someone who was like, "Oh, well, you need to do work with your ancestors." I was like, "No, that's not that's not what I need. That's not like didn't make sense to me." I was like, "How does that have to do with anything?" But once I found my teacher, spiritual healing teacher, I was introduced to constellation work, and this is I still didn't really give it much credit until I saw it work before my eyes. I've now been doing constellation work intensely for 6 years, and I think it's absolutely one of the most profoundly healing things that exists on Earth. I think it's phenomenal. It's literally phenomenal, and to see it is to believe it. I mean, there's no possibility to doubt. And so, like I mentioned, we all kind of just think we're just interacting, doing our own thing, making our own choices, and that's actually not the case. And so these things are passed down, and as you mentioned, science has proved this now. It's something that we can see, without a doubt, that it's working through our DNA. And so it's like we're when something was tried to attempted to be worked out in the field of our ancestors and it wasn't, it just gets passed down and down and down and down and down, and we try to work it out again, and it's not going to happen, and it keeps repeating until this work is done, and this work actually unwinds it out of the field. And to see that happen in real time is something truly extraordinary, and to see someone have a different personality after the work is extremely, extremely extraordinary. I've seen people have cancer disappear in one session. I've seen people have, very serious psychological issues disappear. It's just, literally unwinds out of them if the work is done properly. Now, because constellation work is getting to be more popular, which is great, there's these kind of people who are doing it in, you must be a high level healer and be able to hold that deep field for the work to actually go through. Otherwise it can be dangerous. So I don't recommend, I recommend being careful with who you see with this, but it's extremely, can literally move mountains. It's extraordinary. And I'll just add for people, when I started moving in more spiritual circles, a lot of people would be like, okay, let's do a cacao ceremony, whatever. Let's call in all the ancestors. And I'm like, I don't think you should do that. You don't know what these, not everybody who's dead is happy. And I think it's a really like pretty picture to say like, oh yeah, somebody's dead and they're going to another place and they're in a better place and whatever, but that's just not really oftentimes the case. And so just to be real about it, so I actually have like a leg of my company called Sorella Sancta, which actually supports people in the death process, because one thing we all have in common is that we're all going to die. And it's obviously something that's very scary. And so this is to really support people make that journey in a conscious and beautiful way, to guide them. And so this is also really supportive for everyone in the family, as well. But yeah, it's really important. And I think something about being a Westerner is that we're very much cut off from our lineage. And so we don't have that tradition of learning from our ancestors, getting things passed down. And so we're dealing with all their trauma, but we don't have any of their tools and we don't have any of their support because we just don't know how to do these things, and so it's really important that we get reconnected. I'll see a lot of people that feel like I'm just floating out in space. I got no anchor, and it's because they're cut from that lineage. And so one thing that constellation work can do is put you back in that, in a safe way.
So when maybe we'll talk about like psychedelics and entities and stuff that people kind of encounter and messages they get, and then we'll dive into how that differs to ancestors and that type of thing. But how do you think about when people have high doses of mushrooms or DMT ayahuasca and they tend to meet these different entities and they get these different messages, and it can be positive or negative and that type of thing. So how do you think about all that space?
It's such a big, broad question. It's a little bit hard to answer because, I mean, there's so many different things. I think that, like, so for example, DMT entities, right? Who are like kind of like hanging out waiting for you there. So I've never done DMT, but I've met the DMT entities in meditation sort of accidentally. And I only knew it was them because I had seen these like beautiful artworks, right?
Yeah,
Of like the same thing that everyone sees, which don't you think that's kind of insane that
yeah,
all these people taking DMT all over the world are seeing the same images?
yeah, absolutely. The first time I did it and friends and stuff, it is crazy.
Yeah, so that's the only reason that because I was like following some psychedelic, Instagram pages. The art is beautiful, and I was like in meditation, and I was like, "Who are you?" And they were like, "You know who we are? We're the DMT entities." And I was like, "Oh, but I'm just meditating soberly." But I think that it's literally just different frequencies. I don't believe there's like you know the seventh and the eighth and the ninth dimension, and that's it. I think that's a very human way of trying to understand things, and I think it's absolutely infinite. This is something that quantum physics teaches us, and I believe that there are, I mean, an infinite number of possibilities. And so when we're there, the frequency of this particular medicine takes us to that place. So when we take the DMT molecule, we go to that place where those entities live. They're there all the time.
Yeah,
We're just now able to access them because we've taken the molecule. So I think that this is simply what's happening. I think everyone has a different experience because it's just like how you could get 100 people together in a room and they all have a different. So we're also all going to have a different experience when we're working with different medicines because that's we're doing it from our lens. So I'm perceiving this frequency of this journey from this lens, and I think that's why, although I think the medicines are extremely helpful for curing and really supporting and taking out trauma, they have to be done in a very particular and safe way to not exacerbate it and make it worse and compound it, which can happen. But I think it's kind of how I also feel about everyone's experience of like God or source or whatever you want to call it. I think that it's a reflection of how you experience life and yourself.
yes,
So people that think like God hates them, those people hate themselves. So I think that the same thing can happen when we take psychedelics. Is it's amplifying everything. It's taking off the filters. So people can go throughout their life with this filter of the way they're seeing everything, and then all of a sudden, depending on the medicine, that's gone. And so if you're not doing any kind of internal work, internal investigation, how am I feeling, let me then you're going to be in for a rude awakening, like,
yeah,
oh shit, I actually hate myself, or I never got over this thing that happened when I was a child,
yeah,
whatever. So I think that it's definitely a reflection of you, of each person. I think the entities are something that's really cool. I think all of these medicines have their own frequency and have their own deities or entities, however you want to say it. And so those are like the guardians of the medicines. I think that they also each have their own intelligence as well. And so, like, I had a friend who he's similar to me, does very high level spiritual work, but he was like, fuck it, I don't want to deal with this anymore, I'm just gonna, and he took like some acid and like 5 grams of mushrooms, and nothing happened to him. And he was like, I was like asking what the fuck, and they were like, you're not on the list, it's not gonna happen. So I think that also it depends on where we are, obviously, when we take the medicines. Our intention is extremely important as well, setting, of course. So, but I think that there's a tremendous amount of work, healing work, understanding work, clarity that can be done when we're working with these medicines responsibly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that because a lot of people report not being let in to the
Mm-hmm.
DMT space if they're trying to go there again or if they're not going there for the right reasons and that type of thing. But the other thing you mentioned was when you had that experience from meditation, more and more people are talking about that now, whether it's through breath work or whatever, that we can get that endogenous release of DMT and visit these other spaces. So are you aware of all that type of stuff as well these days?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that, I believe it was Ram Dass who said the medicine will get you in the door. The rest is up to you. And I think that it's a teacher to teach us, oh, this is actually who I really am. This is actually the truth of everything. And so when we can integrate that and bring it back consciously into our lives, it can change us forever. If we're just like, okay, I want to get high again, that's a whole different thing. So I absolutely believe that we can get there without it. I think that it can really help and assist us for sure, which is one of the things it's so great with. But yeah, I mean, at this point for me, like, I don't really work with any medicines anymore. It's sort of like when not that there's anything wrong with it at all, and if they call me again I will, but right now, like, I work with the mushrooms without having to eat them. And I work, like, it was like the same for me when I realized I need to stop reading books and I need to have the direct experience of learning how to read the living book inside me. And so for me, that's the same. Like, I know that I can access um eternal consciousness and oneness without the medicines at this point in my journey, because I've worked so hard. But I think it's a teacher. And so if we can be like, thank you for teaching me, how can I bring this back into my life, then that's gonna, and there's a lot of evidence that people who aren't doing integration after trips are not really getting a lot of benefit from it. It's kind of going away versus like people that are, if we talk about more mental illness, and I use quotes because I'm not a big fan of all these diagnoses, I don't think they're that helpful, but people who are experiencing pain, right, there's evidence that when they work with a healer or a practitioner, that the results can span, they can have remission for years and years and years versus just doing it on their own and kind of coming back and being disoriented or no better for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of people have that similar experience. If they're using it for the right reason, they won't feel the need to do it again.
Right.
Ever, or as you say, maybe they get a calling once a year or whatever it is. It feels like it's a bit of a lock key, a teacher, as you say, and then once you learn it, it's possible. You don't really need to visit it again. But why do you think these things can be so powerful? And people say, that was the most profound experience of my life. It was like 30 years of therapy in one session. Is it unlocking trauma in the nervous system, or how do you think these things are rewiring the brain and getting all these benefits?
I think that, okay, I'm getting a message from the medicines himself, actually. So sometimes it's just luck. Sometimes it's like, this worked for me. I was in the right place at the right time. I had done the right amount of work to lead up to it. And because of that and the perfect situation, the medicine was able to hit a part of me that it needed to. And also, there's just the mechanical science, which we're only just beginning to start to understand. But it can really, the brain can be, if you've had trauma, the brain can be very, very, very tight. And it's just this closed loop, right? So in scientific terms, we call it the default mode network. This just loops that you go over and over and over, and it's very closed, very tight, and there's no opening. So I'm not a big fan of therapy because I believe you can go to therapy for 20, 30 years, or you can come see me or someone like me for like 6 months, maybe 3 months. You can do a couple of, in the right setting, medicine journeys, and it's a whole different ball game. But I think that this type of work is allowing the unwinding of that finally to come. It's stripping it away. So when you're in that closed loop, that very tight wound knot, there's no room for movement. So maybe you can understand, a therapist will be like, oh, well, you just traumatized because of this. Okay, how does that help me? You know, you need to have the tools to be able to unwind it, and to let the nervous system relax. And that's not something that can be done, I don't believe, through talk therapy at all.
Yeah. Where do you think the body stores the trauma? Is it just in the brain with these memories, or people talk about the disease manifesting in different ways throughout the body? Do you think it's nervous system related, or it can be a bit of everything, or how do you think about all that?
I think it's so nuanced, and it depends on the person. So like every time someone comes to me, I'm like, I'm looking into you and seeing where it is in you. And so it could be, so if it's in the body, for example, presenting as dis-ease, it means it wasn't something that wasn't able to be worked out in the emotional body or the noetic or mental body. And so it settled down into the 3D. And this is when it becomes an emergency. So I recently had someone come to me who had been diagnosed with cancer like 22 years ago. And she was like, how many sessions is it going to be? And I'm like, well, you've gathered this pain throughout your entire life. So I don't know. We'll see, but it's, we hope that we can work it out before it gets into the body. And that's why, people will be like, well, I'm fine, I don't need any healing. And it's like, okay, well, just because you're not currently experiencing a disease in the body doesn't mean that everything is fine. Just as we brush our hair and wash our face every day, shower, we also need to care for our emotions and our mind. So I think it really does depend. I mean, I've seen people who've come to me with disease, and like there was in the field etherically a snake wrapped around them, sucking their life out of them. I've seen people where they've had an ancestor trying to kill them, and that's why they were dying. I mean, I could never say it's always this, because it's not. We're all nuanced, and it's something different every time. So what I can say unequivocally is that if it's in the body, it's something that you tried to work out and it wasn't successful through no fault of your own. And now it's here. And so it needs to come out. Do I think trauma is stored in the body? Absolutely. Do I think it's stored in the nervous system? Absolutely. Yeah. This is our like walking meat bag of bones we got going around. And so it's representing everything that we are, everything we've ever thought. It's like Roald Dahl says, when you're happy, like it just light shines out of you. And I believe that's true. And I think the same thing, I look at pictures of myself 10 years ago when I was like having seizures and brain zaps and wanted to die. And I looked like I was dying. I was in so much pain. I looked way older than I look now. I think that it's very nuanced. And I mean, the most important thing is that everything is possible when you find the right support for you.
Yeah. A friend of mine that ran healing breathwork clinics, psychedelics for 20 years. Some of the stories she told me when we caught up were unbelievable about the things that she had seen, and even possessions and things that came out. So this stuff, I know people can think this is pretty out there, but this stuff is absolutely real, and more people are kind of realizing it. As we're in this, I think this kind of global in the West mental health crisis, and there's just so much trauma, and I think a lot of this comes from the current kind of, call it the matrix. It's just, this is not how we're meant to live, in these apartments under artificial lights, or the job you don't like, and it's so hard to find connections with real people, and all this stuff is adding to the trauma load of society. So do you agree with all that?
Yeah, I mean, how could our lifestyle and what's happening around us not have a tremendous influence on our mental health? Of course it does. I fully believe that we were not meant to live like this. I think that the addition of technology and its, complete rampant run is hugely, hugely detrimental to the psyche. And not only that, but to the physical manifestation of the body. And there's 100% evidence of this. It's not like a question, just the blue light alone of our phone, and not to mention the fact that we're literally not meant, we're meant to live in small tribes. We're not meant to wake up and look at 50 different reels of news happening across the world from us of how terrible things are. We're just not meant to live that way. Our psyches cannot handle it.
Yes, I
And
completely
so
agree.
it's really important to become like very vigilant and aware of. So I run these group programs for people, these containers for several months at a time. And one of the homework assignments at the beginning of the containers is always like, for the next 72 hours, make a list, two columns supporting me and harming me of everything you do all day, everything you think. So your own thoughts that you're thinking and also whatever you're seeing. So like if you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is open your phone, you are not going to have a great day. You're seeing the blue light, I mean, so I mean, I have my phone in black and white so that I'm not seeing the hyper real colors that were literally designed to overstimulate your nervous system and purposely make you addicted to your phone.
Yes.
Like, you have to think about how many trillions and trillions of dollars are being spent to force you to have your pineal gland reduced to nothing so that you have no access to any of your multidimensionality, which, by the way, if you did, you would be flabbergasted of how much infinite potential and power that you have. And so why wouldn't someone want to dumb that down as much as humanly possible? And I have to say, I really spend a lot of time by myself. I mean, the work I do is very intense, and so I need a lot of recharging. But when I interact with people, I have to say that I do believe very sadly that people are getting dumber and dumber. And I don't think that that needs to be. I think that I think it's extremely difficult, and I'm not blaming anyone for being addicted to the dopamine and addicted to the screen. Like, it's hard to break those addictions. It takes a conscious effort. So I'm not blaming anyone, but I'm saying that it's an effort that absolutely must be made.
Yeah, that I couldn't agree with all that more. And I'd probably add that we're getting towards AI now, and when we saw the Industrial Revolution and machines, and that took away a lot of the physical labor and people used to do. Now we're heading towards the atrophy of the mind, where people cannot think, and they're using AI and computers for more and
Exactly.
more and more. And I don't know, even AI is this new term, but if you think about it, even old computers in the old days, doing that work for you, again, is starting that process of thinking less. I don't know if you've got anything to add on AI, and then we'll get back
I
into
do.
to the pineal gland atrophy. I want to get into that.
Yeah, I could talk about AI for a long time. I've definitely talked about it a lot. I've been quite outspoken about it. There's definitely a lot already proven research that the brain is atrophying when it's using these technologies. So you're getting stupider versus like if you sit and write down a grocery list even with a pen and a paper, your brain is making new neural networks. You're getting smarter. So just like I have all my students journal by hand every day. You're not writing in your phone or whatever else. I mean, the evidence is there, like I don't think it's ever smart in any way to do anything that's making your brain atrophy. But I mean, like I said, I could talk about AI for ages, but just the sheer fact of how much it's harming the youth is completely insane to me. And I've seen a lot of, the suicides and the sexual explicit nature of children who are, under 10 years old. It's just insane. And I don't think there's no reason for it. And the thing is, nobody asked for this. We don't want this. And the people are like, oh, it's going to make my life so much easier. Like, wake up. It's not going to make your life easier. It's going to take your job away. Who do you think's going to, do you think that you're going to get a robot who's going to make your life easier and help you around? Like, how are you going to pay for that? It just doesn't make any sense. And I believe that I might lose some people here, but if we go, I think history is one of our biggest teachers. And if you're intelligent, then we would look to the past. Of course, it's difficult to do because a lot of the history is falsified, right?
Yeah.
But I believe, and this is not from reading in any book, but this is from my own direct experience meditating with the people who guide me in the ethers, is this is exactly what happened in Atlantis. And it got to a point where humanity was basically bred out of us. and we didn't have any longer compassion and love and the ability to use our brain, and we became machine, which is the goal here. And it was a experience in humanity that failed. Then came the floods, and then new life, and here we are again repeating, 2000, or I think a lot more years than that later, repeating the same thing again. And I think it's quite insane. And for me to have seen all this happen way before it started to come out, and to watch it now is definitely very surreal for me, to see it unfold and see people be like, I got into it with this girl who followed me on Instagram, and the only reason I entertained her was because I actually know her from many, many years ago. She was a volunteer when I ran a nonprofit before I became a healer full time. And she was like, and I was just saying how harmful, all the many, many reasons that you can't argue with that are so harmful for AI. And she was like, that's all true, but I like it. And it's nicer to me than all my friends. And I don't have a boyfriend. And it's, and so I really, really understand how lonely it is to be a human in this day and age. Like, I'm not immune to that. I experience that as well. So I really understand that we want someone around to tell us we're good and pretty and nice and did the right thing, and we're right in the argument, and our boss is an asshole and whatever else. But it's not real, and it's not helpful. And I see it actually really harming relationships as well, because everybody's like, well, ChatGPT told me I'm right.
Yeah.
And like, that's insane, And not to mention the people who are in relationships with these chats. I mean, it's just completely insane to me.
Yeah, and then we had the Congress hearing where AI's convinced some of these kids to self harm and stuff. It's just it's insane where this is all heading. But I think this is kind of adding to the Great Awakening and that bifurcation where some people, as you say, it feels like they're getting dumber, or they're not learning new things, and they're just stuck in that loop as you described. Whereas other people are starting to look around and go, hold on, if there's AI and then if there's a robot, like, what is the even point of being a human? Is it just to pay taxes and then I'm old and sick by the time I can retire? People starting to question, well, what's the meaning of life and the bigger picture? And this is adding to that spiritual awakening, I think, which is a good thing. Did I glitch out then? Sorry. Did you catch all that?
Yeah, you did for a second, but I think I got it. Yeah, I think anything that makes people question, what is life? Why am I here? What is this all about? Is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think, that's why people that have like NDEs, like near death experiences, for example, it's always a really positive thing for them. So I think that anything that can help people question their life is always going to be positive. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still there. It's just glitching in and out a bit, but you're all right.
Okay. Okay, so I think, yeah, that's always going to be positive. I think that that's one of the blessings of what happened in 2020 is a lot of people were kind of just like going on their merry way, and then they're like, wait a minute. And so anything that's going to help you think differently is always going to be positive. That's one of the huge benefits of psychedelics, right? Because it opens your mind, it gets you out of that default mode network, and can bring healing, and can also bring new revelations and new ideas. And one of the reasons that people get really, really stuck in their ways is because they don't do anything that's opening and expanding their mind. So I think that that's always positive. And I honestly think that we have to look at things positively. We have to look at the positive. Otherwise, like, what is the point? We're not going to make it out if we do. And so if we don't, I think that having gratitude is really important, and spending that mental energy to move towards that is really important. And that's also something that psychedelics can support. And one of the reasons I'm a really big proponent for people who have not experienced psychosis only, in my feeling, for microdosing psilocybin.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say, I had a friend that had a near-death experience recently, and whether it's that or psychedelics, it's just showing the mind that there's something more to this, it can be that spark that start people on their spiritual journey. And I like that there was a lightning strike, as you said, open your mind then in the
Oh,
background
you
too.
heard that? Yeah.
Yeah.
The elements are definitely very, I told you I work with the elements. They're very present. They're like, boom.
So do you want to talk about microdosing a little bit, and then we might get into Kundalini?
Yeah. So I think that I work with a lot of people, usually when you see me, it's not like your first stop. I mean, sometimes it is, which is cool, but a lot of times it's people that have tried a lot of other things and they're not haven't seen a lot of results, whether that's, therapy, like heavy medical treatments, whatever, for whatever the issue is. And so I think when there is a lot of trauma in the system, I don't usually recommend macro dosing anything when someone's in, like, for example, CPTSD, things like this. So I would recommend, in that case, I recommend microdosing. I work with a very specific type of mushrooms for this, which is actually the only thing that I work with my clients, because it's far and away, in all of my experience, the best thing that I have ever seen. They grow these mushrooms in a way that they're prayed over all day. They're listening to mantra all day, and so you can definitely tell the frequency. And I've actually had, on these specific microdoses, a full trip where I've taken 5 grams and had nothing happen. And because of the frequency of these mushrooms, like, I had to cancel my day because I was like, I just took, like the tiniest bit, and I was like, oh, this is happening. I'm like moving into becoming one with this tree now, and I need to cancel my day while I can still use my phone. This was many years ago, but so I recommend working with microdoses, because they're not going to dysregulate your nervous system further. They're not going to, there's very, very, very little potential, if any, for a quote like bad trip or something like this. And it's something that you can build on over time. So when we have a lot of trauma in the system, or a persistent sort of mental illness, again in quotes, we really want to be really, really gentle with the brain and with the nervous system. It needs that I think a lot of modalities, like even for some people, breath work is too intense, depending. And so it's very, very, very gentle, yet it's still going to help the brain get out of that fight or flight mode. It's going to help the brain expand. It's going to help you to be able to first feel safe, which is huge, and then move into a space of opening your consciousness little by little. So it's not like all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh my god, I'm one with everything, I can't handle this. It's like every day a little bit more expansion. You feel a little bit more calm, your heart is opening, you're feeling connected to the people around you, you're maybe feeling joy for the first time again in years, you're maybe remembering things that you love, you're maybe laughing. I remember the first time I heard myself laugh after this brain trauma I told you a bit about with the medication, and I was like, oh my god, I forgot what that sounded like.
Yeah.
It had been years. And so these types of things. And then, so normally when I work with people with microdosing, they're in a mentorship and healing container with me. So we're doing the work as things are coming up. So it's like real time, you're getting the healing from the medicine, and we're integrating it, and we're working with it, and we're pulling it out in a safe, loving, held way. And so I've seen absolutely such beautiful results with this. And then there's no risk of dependency, and the mushrooms are very intelligent, and they will tell you, like, okay, that's enough. I've gone
Yeah.
through periods where I'm microdosing every day, and then I've gone through periods where, like, right now it's been over a year since I've had any, and they'll tell you, like, okay, it's time. And they'll also just really help, because I truly believe that everyone, I don't think that anyone is special. I think that we all have this capacity to experience the oneness that we all came from. And I think that this is a way that, and that's healing.
Yeah.
That's it. Feeling one with, and feeling loved by that source of whatever name you want to call it, it is healing.
Yeah.
And so to have something that can bring you back to that, in such a way that you feel safe and held, that can help you rewire your brain and nervous system is extraordinary. I mean, there's beautiful, beautiful evidence of anxiety, depression, PTSD, CPTSD, addiction recovery, so many things that otherwise, like, I mean, if I would have just given what was diagnosed to me, like, you're never going to get better. They told me the only chance I had was if I got a lobotomy. Like, that's insane, So to go from, I mean, thank God I didn't believe that. And if anyone is listening who's been told the same bullshit, it's not true. Please don't believe it, And so to go from really not a lot of hope to like, wait a minute, my brain can be rewired. Like, again, I don't believe there's any case. I've seen people given 3 weeks to live that are alive today and fine.
Yeah.
I don't believe that there's any case where there's no hope at all. And I think that microdosing is one thing that that almost anyone can benefit from, especially if they have support.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the war on consciousness, and more and more people are waking up to fluoride, GMOs, chemtrails and stuff has started to even go on some of the bigger podcasts now. So what are your thoughts on all these efforts? And is it just the pineal gland in the brain to kind of dumb us down? And do you think it is ultimately a war on consciousness?
I do. I think it's a war on consciousness, and I also think it's a war on humanity. And I'm happy that it's getting more coverage and that it's not as insane. I still think, and I think this is on purpose, I think that so many people who are very in an educated way talking about these things are just being like, if I say anything about anything, I'm shadow banned. That's it. It's like, you can't say anything. And I think there's such a huge divide, which is by design, right? And like, it can be difficult to talk to people who are totally in the dark because there's so much programming. There's so many trillions of dollars that had been spent in being like, she's insane, And so that frustrates me a lot. And I'm like, man, I wish you would just, maybe be a little bit open to learning and then forming your own opinion. I'm certainly not someone who's like, this is how you have to believe, this is how it is. The way that I teach is I push you deeper into yourself so that you can walk around and be like, oh my gosh, my intuition is telling me that this is true and this is not true, So I think that that's really important. And but I am encouraged by so many more people becoming aware. I think that it's insane how difficult it is to live any kind of clean lifestyle, and especially in the US. And I know that there's a lot of similarities with Australia. I mean, there's a reason I'm not in the US, I haven't seen a chemtrail since I moved to Bali, and it's extraordinary. Like, this is the actual sky, and it's so cool to see. And the first time I saw the sky outside of the US was in Croatia several years ago when I sort of started traveling again. And I was like, this is what the sky used to look like when I was a kid.
Yes.
And it's just crazy how it's like when something happens a little bit at a time, we don't notice it. And it's like the masterminds of the world are putting every dollar and every genius brain they have to trick you. And it's like, I mean, well done,
Yeah.
But I think that it's really important that we don't poison ourselves, and that we keep ourselves clean, and that we keep ourselves strong, our mind strong and our bodies strong, so that we can live from our own sense of what's true and what's not true. And I think that it's increasingly more and more and more difficult to do that in the US. I mean, you can't even organic food now is still poisoned. Yeah. And the fact that we're allowed to eat food that's been sprayed with these neurotoxins, and that's the norm, is insane.
Yeah. As interesting you mentioned, you got to keep your mind strong, because I think the attack on the mind and the programming from social media, just everything is based around dopamine. And I've got a bit of a theory around dopamine and serotonin kind of being the yin and the yang, and society's just all wired towards dopamine. and that feeds the ego, and people don't want to be wrong. And when you say people are in the dark and they don't want to hear it or they can't believe it, it's because that would mean that they're wrong and it's their ego protecting them. Whereas once you start reconnecting and having living healthy and all that other stuff comes into balance, you can be open-minded to anything and having discussions and that type of thing. So that's probably a good segue into the last thing I want to talk about, which is Kundalini. So this is, you mentioned breath work can be too intense for some people, but to explain to people what Kundalini is, and we see these crazy clips where people are having these almost like seizures and having these great awakenings from doing Kundalini.
Yeah. So I don't teach it like that because I just don't think that that's safe. You know, when I've been teaching Kundalini for a long time, and whenever someone comes to me and they haven't done it before, I'm always like, don't Google it, because you're going to see all these crazy things. You're going to see all these people saying like, you're going to go insane and all. It's like, come, I mean, this is, and I always ask in my like forum when you feel to work with me, like, have you done Kundalini before? Have you done it with me? Because I teach it in a very different way, and it's a very, very beautiful ancient practice. It's over 4,000 years old. It's the technology for the body, and it really just clears you out and cleans you out. So there's different kriya. There's a kriya for everything. There's kriyas for your pineal gland to clear it out. There's one thing that's always been told to me by my guides is like, make sure your mind is clear and your body is clear and healthy and strong. And I love Kundalini because that's what it does. It just clears out all the bullshit. And like, you could go to therapy for 3 hours and talk to the therapist, or you could do Kundalini for like 45 minutes and you're like good as new. It just really clears you out. And so I really love that. It's also like, I don't get sick anymore after doing Kundalini. It just really, really, really supports the body and the mind together. And it's very intense, but the way that I teach it is so no one's having like an accidental pop open into the universe before they're ready. And I teach it in a very, very grounded way. So before we even begin, we root really deeply into the earth. And so it's a really beautiful, really powerful practice. Sometimes when people aren't able to do a session with me, they'll just purchase a recorded class, and they've had extreme breakthroughs, like so many people, just from doing the recorded classes. I program them to work for anyone who's using them at any time, at any moment. So they're like alive. And I get a lot of people saying, like, I fell asleep afterwards. And, one person I had, like, she had a kidney stone, and she had felt me come in and take it out. And then she went to get the scans and it was gone, and like things like that. So it is a bit unique the way I teach it, because again, it's very grounded. And then also, I'm doing it in the spiritual healing field. So it's on a deeper level. And yeah, I mean, you can definitely have psychedelic experiences with it as well. The breath work is really powerful. A lot of the modern breath work that people are teaching actually comes from that lineage. So, and then one thing I do is like channeled sadhanas. So if you come to me with like an issue, I will create a sadhana specifically for you, for what you're going through in your life. So, for you, it might be a holotropic type of breath, or it might be a relaxing type of breath. It depends. Everyone has different needs. And I don't do like one size fits all type of stuff, because we're all very different, and healing is very nuanced.
Yeah. Well, we could talk for hours, but I'll put all the links for people to follow your work and get in touch with you down below. But how do you want to wrap up, and any other services that you offer, or what's the best ways for people to get in touch?
Yeah, so I'll definitely send the links. I have on my offerings page, just talks about everything that I offer, the spiritual healing / constellation work, which I spoke about, which is kind of the most popular thing that people will do. I have my mentorship program, which is for those who like really want to go all in and get ongoing support as well as healing. And in that, I also offer the consultation for microdosing. And then I also offer that as a one-off type of thing. I don't facilitate any any medicines, and of course you have to go by the local laws in your region, but consultation, integration, healing with that. I also do the death work, which I spoke about, and I also offer group containers, which they'll be the next one will be in 2026, which is a really cool way to get back into community. And people love it so much because there's, exclusive Telegram groups, and it's really like, these are my people, and it's very, I think one of the things that's so dissociating is that we don't have a community, as we both mentioned, anymore. And so that's something I'm really passionate about, is creating that community, so that you can feel supported and seen. A lot of people on this journey are really lonely. And so having those connections are really, really important. So those are the ways to work with me. And I'll just say to anyone listening, if you're going through it, like, keep going, because there's absolutely always hope. There's always something that you can find that works for you. And if you feel called to work with me, I'd be so happy to support you.
Amazing. Well, yeah, keep up the great work. All the links down below, guys, and we'll have to catch up again in future. Thanks for your time, Giada.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Bye, guys.